Our first speaker will be Mike Hanssens, speaking about what I originally thought of the new school as a sort of the econometric school of the world. So, Mike,
thank you.
you're on the clock.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so now what do I do? Escape. Escape? That's good.
View as the slideshow.
That's why we brought Peter.
Hanssens, all right.
H-A-N.
Good. Thank you very much. We're all set. Well, it is a great pleasure to be here, and as already been alluded to, we had a wonderful time last night, and I certainly did it. Felt like being back, and I'm very, very delighted. This was going to be a talk with Dick, and I'm very grateful that Dave has made a tribute to Dick last night, made it easier, a little bit easier for me, still not very easy. And I just can't get him out of my mind, so he's still here. Sorry. But we've got to move on, and I just wanted very much to be here in these clothes. I looked at the conference program of the 2005 Marketing Science, and there were approximately 120 sessions here. And I kind of did a fairly cursory review of content, and I kind of roughly approximated that about 40 of these sessions at this conference were really of an econometric nature. And I was thinking, my goodness, what a tremendous contribution, what a point of view that the econometric modeling tradition in marketing is not the specialty topic that it once was with a track left and a track right. It's sort of become a mainstream view of how one studies econometrics, or how one studies marketing problems, I should say. And so, in a good historical fashion, perhaps appropriate for today, where did it all start? Well, that's of course an extremely easy question for this audience, and in fact we got the precursor of that last night. Of course, it all started in the vast basement. And as a result of all of this having started in the vast basement, I'm going to announce ahead of time that the rest of this talk, and unlike the others, is going to have some vast bias. And by that I mean that I will pay tribute to a lot of great scholars, and I will probably be forgetting some others. And I apologize ahead of time, but this is vast bias. And so with that in mind, I was very privileged to be in the vast basement in the mid-70s. And I kind of look back and said, all right, as far as the econometric tradition is concerned, what really happened there that had a major influence kind of long run? So I was looking for, like, what were the seeds that were being planted there econometrically that led to a lot of subsequent research, some of which I'll try to review time permitting. And sort of I decided that there were 4 main articles, okay? And here they are. And of course they reflect my timestamp. There were many other articles, and subsequent speakers will address those. So this is in the econometric tradition, okay? So I call them the 4 econometric seeds of the vast basement. And seeds grow into roots, and of course good roots become unit roots, and unit roots shape the future in ways that when you backtrack you can find the original seed. Okay. So what are my 4 unit roots from the vast basement? Well, here they are. Whitland Parsons, late 60s, Frank's very fundamental work on simultaneity, which led really to a systems view of marketing, not just a single equation view, in other words, but a systems view. Secondly, Frank's work with Pete Clark on distributed lag models, which really started to hold a very, very fruitful tradition of marketing dynamics. Fundamental recognition that marketing's impact is not in the same time period, but across several time periods, and as you well know, that led to a whole tradition in and of itself. And then, of course, Bass's work with Dick Whitting on pooling issues. why are these pooling issues so important? These pooling issues are so important because of data explosion. The more data explosion we have, the more smart decisions need to be made about how to combine the data and how to build appropriate models. And that then leads to issues of how should you aggregate? And there I refer to the Bassel and Leon article. Now, the Bassel and Leon article, I graduated 77, so that wasn't part of my basement. But I talked to Bob yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure, and he confirmed that the roots of that work, which appeared in the 80s, also came from the Bass basement, so it very much belongs up there as well. And that has led to much improved inference based upon the sort of the fundamentals of the appropriate unit of aggregation. Okay? So here are the 4 econometric seeds as I see it. And what I wanted to do with these seeds is, build some trees from them. Okay? And this is a slide I put on at 6 o'clock this morning. I wasn't going to show any equations, but Frank got us so much re-excited about equations that I figured we've got to have an equation on there. Okay? So this is a basic VAR model that Marnik de Kempel, who's also here, started in his doctoral dissertation. So that's Bass research of the 2nd generation. And so there's been a lot of work basically recognizing that, so rather than treating simultaneity as a nuisance, because your ordinary least squares estimates are basically very problematic, and embrace it and look at not only market response, but look at a whole combination of effects, all of which we know are happening, such as direct effects of marketing, and that vector right there that you see, reinforcement effects, cross effects in the marketing mix should be represented. Of course, the famous feedback effects, which comes from the Parsons work on simultaneity. And finally, of course, the inertia in the system that we know very, very well exists as well. And so, consequently, the whole VAR tradition, which has done quite well since about the early 90s, is really kind of the combination of the Bass and Clark work on dynamics and the Bass and Parsons work on simultaneity kind of brought together in a way that at least I feel can address and has addressed a number of very important substantive issues in marketing. Okay. So that's just my one equation, no more, I promise. Okay. Let me now, having discussed these seeds a little bit, kind of go forward and do a couple of things in the time that's left here. Okay? First of all, I'd like to just sort of propose out of these seeds and these roots 4 directions, some of which have already begun to be explored, which I think are worthy of further scrutiny, that are very modeling oriented. In other words, this is mostly a modeling audience here, so this part is mostly about sort of challenges for market response modeling. And then I'd like to stop that and talk a little bit more about the marketing issues that Frank's work in econometrics has really spawned. And one issue there is how do we use that stuff for driving marketing knowledge, in other words, fundamental marketing insights. And then finally, how do we use that knowledge for driving marketing practice? And I'm very honored to be the next executive director of MSI. And so with my work of MSI, of course, since MSI is the bridge between those, I very much hope to explore these issues in my day-to-day in Cambridge. Okay, so that's the structure. So going forward, now this isn't trying to be all exhaustive, of course. I picked on some what I consider to be very important issues. The first issue, I'm so glad John Little is here, because John alluded to that several years ago, that market response is fundamentally asymmetric, that rise and decay rates are different, and that starting a marketing campaign is not the same as ending a marketing campaign times -1. So in dynamic terms, we're asking ourselves the question, is a positive marketing shock equivalent, in terms of effectiveness, equivalent to minus a negative marketing shock? Okay? Well, there's sort of limited empirical evidence on this. There's only a few papers that have actually kind of found this empirically and have been able to run with this. So as a result, I see one challenge, because managerially it makes a big difference if you're starting a campaign versus ending a campaign. I see a big difference here and a big opportunity for working with this asymmetry. So for example, if higher marketing spending does not benefit the brand in the long run, that doesn't preclude the possibility that lower marketing spending could harm the brand in the long run. Okay? A lot of managers will say that. Okay? And it seems that to us as scholars, picking up on that trend that Frank started, that we ought to try to have a better understanding here about the stationality that you see in businesses that are either very natural or competition-induced. In other words, even though the marketing doesn't work, if you were to stop doing it because of competition, for example, you might actually see a deterioration in performance. We need a lot more understanding in this area, and I think it flows beautifully out of the tradition, as I said, that was started in the last basement. Second challenge for market response modelers is changing dynamics. And that's a very, very simple question. If you observe an empirical pattern in the data, let's say up till this year, and you make some sort of a resource allocation decision, assuming that the same pattern will continue, can you basically make that assumption? In the dynamic market response models that I and others have looked at, we kind of frame that as saying, well, maybe not all shocks are created equal. In other words, not all marketing activities have the same effect at every particular point in time. Okay? So how does one approach that? What are some research opportunities there? I really see wonderful opportunity for working with moving windows, and in this conference there were already 2 or 3 papers that approached it that way. There's wonderful opportunities for using Kalman filters, which are time-varying time-varying marketing effectiveness models, and therefore we have an opportunity here for marketing theory testing in an evolving environment as opposed to a more typical stationary environment. Okay? Just 2 quick illustrations of this of second generation BAS research, meaning the generation after me and many others here. But Kuhn-Pauwels likes to work with moving windows, and here is sort of one very simple finding that he and I observed on some data. We've actually replicated that on all data, that if you look at mature markets, most of the time it's business as usual. So that means that if you detect a marketing pattern, you can probably reasonably extrapolate from it. Okay? Some of the time, performance is improving, and we have tests for that. Less of the time, conditions are deteriorating. Okay? So this is kind of what we observe happens in stationary markets. Okay? That's a little bit different from what we've assumed in the past, where we kind of treat all observations as being equal. Okay? In fact, this looks an awful lot like punctuated equilibrium from the organizational behavioral literature, which basically argues that some events are more important than others, and our tasks as marketing econometricians, at least in this direction, it seems to me, is to start to understand which are these special events that seem to be causing patterns that are very, very different from the past. Okay? A second approach, and this one also is a second generation approach by Shijin Yu, where he takes a look at, for example, the persistence of shocks that are initiated at different time periods. Okay? See, in a traditional market response or a dynamic response model, you would always assume that these things are the same. Okay? But over time, they may be very, very different. Now, this is not a standard time-varying model. What this basically argues is that the unique pattern generated by a shock, the long-term effectiveness, in other words, how it shapes the future, the unit root, in other words, that in itself changes over time. And it's quite, I personally think it's quite fascinating because we're beginning to understand what these critical elements are that may have an impact. And here's an application just in a pricing context. Well, challenge number 3. Challenge number 3 is data explosion and aggregation bias. Okay? And as I've hinted at earlier, Dick Whitting's article with Frank, I think, was instrumental in getting us starting to think about these issues. Okay? I see a close connection between the pooling question in econometrics and the data explosion opportunities that we now actually enjoy but also have to deal with. Dick has a very interesting paper with several co-authors, JMR 97, in which he studies the consequences of aggregation bias and the conditions under which your aggregate parameter estimates are biased. Okay? And look what a really kind of neat set of conditions we're starting to develop, which takes over also from the work that I alluded to with Bob Leon, that we're starting to understand under which conditions we can actually trust the aggregated data versus we cannot. Okay? Well, here's why this is important. This is important because managers, even if they have a lot of data, still have to make resource allocation decisions. And with the exception of some one-on-one marketing, where the allocation is to one single customer, most of our marketing, by definition, is at a market level. And so, therefore, we need to learn more about, now that we have all of this data, all of this explosion, okay, how do we really derive an overall elasticity, given that you have very, very many elasticities? So the data explosion is welcome from a modeler's perspective because there's a lot more fun now, a lot more degrees of freedom. But from a managerial perspective, I see it as a big challenge, and I list some of these challenges there in order for us to derive meaningful inferences for resource allocation. Okay, and the last one, the last challenge to marketing modelers as I see it, or to econometric modelers, is one that was very close to Dick, and that's the notion of policy simulation. And here I would refer very simply to the special issue that Dick Whitting spearheaded. It appeared just a few months ago in JMR. It's a wonderful, or I should say special sub-issue. It's a wonderful set of papers on what are the consequences in marketing of the application of the famous Lucas critique in economics. Okay? And so just in a nutshell, the economic agents that we study are forward-looking, they do adapt to new policies and so forth, and therefore, because of certain policy interventions, the future is not always equal to the past. So therefore, those of us like myself who like to work with econometric models, many of them of the reduced forward type, tend to look at these summaries of past correlations which we assume will persist in the future. Okay? So that is the whole issue of policy simulation, and what Dick and the special issue has drawn attention to is the notion that it may be possible for us to derive conditions under which you can do this versus not, and therefore vastly improve upon the quality of our models. If we resolve this problem, I think we're going to see much more use of our research in a marketing practice or in a marketing decision-making setting. Here is one great opportunity. While we're busy doing econometric modeling, especially of the dynamic type, some people in economics are busy building formal optimization models with empirical substantiation. It's called the NEO tradition. And as the NEO tradition applies to marketing, I see it, sort of the very key question is, are we going to bring more structure in our dynamics, or are we going to be bringing dynamics into structure? Those of you who've worked with that know how difficult it is to disentangle dynamic relationships from optimal or optimization relationships, and there's certainly some early work in that area that is looking very promising. So, in summary, what I've tried to do here, and I know this was imperfect, was to kind of discuss 4 fundamental contributions that I think in econometrics came out of the vast basement, and kind of draw a little bit of a timeline along with some new contributions along the way of what I see some major future for these particular research streams. The 2 areas that I have left to do in my 10 minutes or so that are left are, one, talk a little bit about Frank's influence not only on the econometric side, but here on the side of driving marketing knowledge, so the substantive question. And then finally, of course, I'll do that in a few minutes, the question of driving marketing practice. Driving marketing knowledge, my view, and I know this is shared by Don Lehman and many others, I think in the econometric tradition means that we got to pay more attention to our empirical generalization, or empirical generalizations, excuse me. You're well aware of the special issue that Frank organized in Marketing Science back in 1995, That special issue was mandatory reading for all of our doctoral students at UCLA for many years to come. It's a wonderful issue that kind of summarizes what it is that we've learned in substantive terms. I know that speakers after me are going to hit upon this more, so I'm not going to spend a lot of effort on this. But it is very, very important for the obvious link between the data and the knowledge that it produces. Okay. And then a different aspect. A lot of our good econometrics in marketing has, of course, been driven by data availability. And starting in roughly the 1980s or so, a lot of that data has been of the scanner type, the Nielsen, the IRI databases. And we've done a great job analyzing coupon effects, basically, in various promotion strategies. So what I say here is, as a wonderful extension of our work and a blossoming of our discipline, is to go from all of this couponing tradition to what I like to call the big issues. And I mean the big issues not econometrically, but strategically. And as I see it, the big issues that econometrics really can handle, and I think probably can handle better than any other research approach, are right there. Issues of customer equity, brand equity, dealing with competition, and dealing with capital markets. Okay. As you know, we're sometimes criticized in marketing that we're too tactical, we're too myopic, we don't see the big picture from a senior executive perspective, etc. And some of that may be justified in terms of what we've been doing in the past. But if we start hitting these big issues with empirically verifiable methods that econometrics offers us, I think that picture will change very quickly. And just to give you a couple of examples here, you're probably aware of Don Lehman's work, and there's now a very interesting book he just finished with Sunil Gupta that really sharpens our understanding of the analytics of customer equity. There's a couple of second-generation BAS researchers there that are doing very specific papers on how to use econometrics to measure the components and the impact of customer equity. Then switching to brand equity, that's a really tough one because that one obviously is mostly dominated by our colleagues in consumer psychology. But Don again did a wonderful paper in which he shows that you can use econometrics to answer some very fundamental questions about the importance of brand equity, and the answer is very simple. Either your brand equity raises your volume or it raises your price premium. And econometrically, Don and his co-authors have sort of figured out a way how to disentangle that. If your brand equity can't do either, well then it's not brand equity. Okay? Or at least it's not worth much. Okay? So that's a hard-nosed sort of factual approach to how do you put the value of brand equity in really measurable terms. Okay? Third, there is of course a wonderful research stream that's been going on for some time on competition. And I draw your attention here to the special work that Dave Riepstein and Dick Whitting did in organizing a conference, an MSI conference on competition, where a lot of good econometric work was presented, which then led to a special issue of marketing science. I also draw your attention here to a very kind of a highlight, certainly in my career, that I want to just talk one minute about. And that's a paper that I was fortunate to co-author with Marnik de Kempe and Vincent Nijs and J.B. Steenkamp. And here's what's so special about this paper. It's about competition. Is that paper won the Bass Prize. And that was I think it was in 2002, I think it was the University of Maryland. And I don't think many people in the audience sort of picked up on that. But here's what happened. So here's, of course, Frank Bass gives out the Bass Prize. And so for about 2 minutes on the podium, there were 4 generations on that podium. Okay? It was Frank, and me, and Marnik, and Vincent. Vincent Nijs is Marnik's student, Marnik is my student, I'm Bass's student. Okay? It was just absolutely wonderful. Okay? And it will for always be a highlight, certainly, in my career. And then finally, in addition, as I said, to the work, the econometrics of competition, I think it is high time that we pay attention to investors. Okay, consumers are great. Investors have the money. Okay? And so let's take some of our market response stuff and take it into the investigation of capital markets. How do investors react to marketing mix activities? There's a great deal of good work on major events like mergers and acquisitions and CEO changes, and that's been done. Okay? we don't know a whole lot about what happens when a company suddenly announces a price change. Okay? We do know from limited empirical evidence that, for example, when Netflix brought its subscription price down from whatever, $20 to $18, the stock price fell. Okay? Well, was that a rational anticipation? When you drop the price, does that necessarily mean that you're going to be worse off in the future? Well, market response models say, well, not necessarily. It depends on price elasticities and whatnot. Okay? So our understanding of how investors react to marketing decisions, I think, is just as important as how consumers react. And in fact, if we do a good job in this, we'll get the ear of Wall Street. And Wall Street is important. And Wall Street will get us as a discipline much more, I think, in the limelight than all of our, let's say, promotional research was ever able to accomplish. A couple of second-generation research there, Shubha Srinivasan, Kun Howell, Amit Joshi. There's several others now. Again, at this conference, there were some very nice papers being presented, once again, coming straight out of the vast basement with a couple steps in between on the effects of marketing on capital markets. Okay, I'm tracking just about on time, but these are sort of a few points that I wanted to raise about the connection between, bass econometrics and driving marketing knowledge. And then finally is the question about driving marketing practice. If we look at our discipline, we've had our hits and misses in terms of influencing marketing practice. If you look on the side of survey research, you see that, for example, conjoint analysis has been a huge hit and continues to be a huge hit. And I honestly think that with the data explosion that is now so common, that we are going to see, and in fact already seeing, a big hit of marketing econometrics as a way to improve marketing decision making. And I wanted to talk briefly about this and some of the pros and cons. Well, first of all, again, a very fond memory, because it happened while I was a doctoral student. Purdue University, believe it or not, has an airport. And it's not a very frequently used airport, and it would use these little turboprops or whatever, little airplanes that fly you to Chicago and places like that. But a couple of times in the mid-70s when I was there would be a jet that would land, which caused tremendous excitement in the community because a jet was seen in the air and landing at Purdue Airport. That's something to write about. Now, what's a jet doing at Purdue Airport? It was there to pick up Frank Bass. This was the corporate jet belonging to Procter & Gamble because Frank was a leading witness in a major case that pitted them against Clorox over bleach. And what Frank did, and I think it was, if not the first, it was certainly among the leading or the very first applications of market response modeling in the courtroom, where you use hard market response evidence to go argue. And as I recall, Frank, your point was that the demise of Clorox was not due to the Procter & Gamble advertising, as they alleged, but rather that it was due to price differential. And so prior to that, it would have been one set of opinions against another set of opinions with very little data. But what Frank did is he came in with some solid econometric models and really demonstrate what the driver of business performance was. Well, I use that again in a Bass bias setting here as one of these early contributions that has helped contribute to what is now really an industry of marketing mix models or marketing mix modeling. And there's many competitors in there. There's large ones and small ones and so forth. So that work has really blossomed at the practical level. Now, 2 points about this, and then I'll close. 2 points is that, first of all, at the marketing tactical level, the information technology connection is just simply great. Okay? You see my PowerPoints, they're handmade. In other words, I did them myself. They're not very good by today's standards. I hope my content is good to make up for it. But you should see these PowerPoints. I mean, it's amazing what these young people can do in terms of visualization to drive complex issues home with very, very compelling PowerPoints. And it's important because it communicates complex material, and if done well, can make a great deal of influence. The PowerPoints have evolved into more formal visualization techniques. The visualization techniques now lead to things like dashboards and navigators. I've seen a couple of them at work, and they are really quite spectacular. So you got econometric models basically driving predictions of the future, conditional forecasts where managers then allow to change scenarios and look at the implications for their business. Okay? I raise as a question here, I don't have a very good answer to it, but I plan to find out while I'm at MSI. Are these practitioners, are they just running regressions, or are they really building good marketing econometric models? I don't have a good answer. I just want to raise it as an issue. I have a little bit of a concern that maybe they may be using techniques that predate the vast basements. Okay? And that some of the lessons that we've just summarized, going back to the 70s, take distributed lags, for example, or Dan Harsky's follow-up on distinguishing between carryover effects and purchase reinforcement effects. I don't have proof, but I have sort of a suspicion that we have yet to transfer that into industry. And if we do so, since industry is so much bigger than we are as academics, we have a huge opportunity for expanding our impact on marketing practice. Okay? And then finally, and this is my last point, is we've talked here about marketing econometrics, but so you got econometrics, but you can't have econometrics without metrics, right? So there's metrics leads to econometrics. And in our work as academics, we have pushed real hard on the econometric side for very good reason, okay? But sometimes we probably haven't paid as much attention to the metrics themselves, which to us as academics tend to be sort of convenience metrics. Now you have some sales data, some market share data, etc. For executives, they can be, you know, life and death in the sense that their performance is evaluated based upon the movement of these metrics. And so therefore it is upon us, in addition to building good models econometrically, to also pay very, very close attention to whether or not we're using the right metrics. And I'm very, very pleased, especially, you know, acknowledging my predecessors at MSI, that there is a wonderful movement within the MSI and the practitioner community to pay more to attach more importance to metrics as fundamental connections, as I say there, between the market response modeling that we do and the strategic decision making. Okay? Without this, we probably, as market response modelers, will continue to operate sort of at the staff level in organizations. In other words, we'll be able to have some of our quantitatively smart people, some of our MBAs, some of our MS degrees, etc., sort of build models inside organizations, market research firms, etc. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to hit the C-suite, I think we got to make the point on metrics. Okay, what is that? How important is customer satisfaction? When is market share important? When do you go for customer equity? When do you use brand equity measures and so forth? Okay, and we've learned so much through the work that was generated by Frank and others. We've learned so much about the connections between the metrics that I think if we do a better job in justifying the metrics themselves, we will go a long way towards influencing marketing strategy. So that's the conclusion. I just wanted to give a brief overview. I'm very honored to have been given this platform for a little while, and I think I'm more or less on time. And so I'll open it up for questions and shouting and whatnot. But I do want to say thank you on behalf of all of us. So thank you, Dr. Bass, for planting the seeds that created the forest. Thank you.
Now the only thing is, if you find out that
If it is not, it's almost akin to sampling from different demand curves and connecting the points, because if the different weeks are generated in different equilibria, the slopes would be different in those. So that's one concern. And I think when I raised this in a conference, Peter Rees mentioned that the proper way to do that would be to impose certain constraints to make sure that you are in the unique equilibrium. That is, your data generation process is similar, so that the slope is really what you claim it to be. You know?
Yeah.
So I think some care needs to be given there.
But it's empirically testable, right?
Sure. It is.
Yeah. If it's empirically testable, we're probably in good shape. Yeah. What I always do, for example, a very practical note, I'm a big user of eView software. And I will never run an eView software without checking the parameter path, which comes out automatically now. If you know where to click, you can sort of find a parameter path from the first 50 observations or so on till today. Okay? So you get a very quick view that says, okay, is that process that you're studying, does it replicate itself week after week, or is there really something changing? So where you may not make that assumption. So that's the great solution we offer. Those of us who are very data-oriented, we can always test the premises. As you said, and the testing is absolutely essential here. All right.
Well, I may make a concluding comment. As somebody who's been doing this since the beginning and through Parsons and Schultz and Hanssens, Parsons and Schultz, I have a pretty good feel for how it's being used in industry. And while there have been people using it for quite a while, and some companies like Kraft, where it's been basically driving the company for a while, that looking ahead to the diffusion models coming up and the S-shaped curve, surprisingly, even though this has been going on for 40 years, we're just now accelerating into the fast-growing part of the curve. And I see much, much more interest in the last few years than over my whole career. I find companies actually going out and collecting the data they need to do the models rather than just going by the data that happens to be there. And I see companies like Coca-Cola, which operate all over the world, getting the data they need for the kinds of things they do and paying people to do it. It's important enough to them. And within, say, the last 5 to 7 years, they have basically done marketing mix models in virtually every country they operate in the world, whether developed, underdeveloped, not developed. When they did that process, they ended up increasing their profits company-wide by $350 million. The impact of this work that's really started with Frank is huge. Because it's spreading across the world and through HBS and the like, I'm getting queries from odd places, from Colombia. The impact of this is just really taking off. And not from Don's Columbia University. Well, that is a backwater. And what I also have seen is when we did it, Parsons and Schultz, we talked a lot about optimization. When we did HPS, and particularly the recent edition, we sort of downplayed the optimization and switched to forecasting. But what I see now is it's really coming full cycle, that optimization based on market response models is really coming into the fore within companies. And revenue management that was basically driven by accounting and at best forecast, the companies are now realizing that they need to do market response modeling to underlie the revenue management. And these things are going well beyond the frequently purchased consumer goods and going into major hotel chains, building market response modeling into their revenue management systems, bringing a lot of interesting challenges because the models structures are, in many situations, are a little different than the traditional frequently purchased consumer goods, creating sort of interesting new things for people to work on. I think, you know, add to that, I think you have a sense
I completely agree. Yeah, I'm also getting the inquiries from weird places, as you say. Okay? And some of these weird places are actually pretty sophisticated. So it's not all happening in North America. It is truly a global effort, in part fueled, I think, by the data availability, but also a little bit, I honestly think that it's because we're going through tough economic times. This didn't really happen in the 90s, because the 90s were growth. And now it's get more bang for the dollar, and so therefore market response models is really very, very well suited for that. With the next major growth spurt in the global economy, I hope that our companies are not going to forget the lessons of marketing econometrics and assume another never-ending growth wave. Thank you. Are we about?